The station rotated with a quiet, patient rhythm most humans stopped noticing after a few days. I never did. It wasn't the motion. It was the feeling that the place was thinking while it turned, like something alive pretending to be architecture. The walls curved in ways that made no structural sense. Smooth, pale, almost like bone polished over centuries, and sometimes if you stared too long you could swear they shifted, just slightly, adjusting to something you couldn't see. I was posted in the inner ceremonial corridor. Officially, I was security. Unofficially, I was decoration. A human presence to reassure alien dignitaries that we wouldn't accidentally start a war over the wrong gesture. Again, the air carried that same faint metallic sweetness, not unpleasant, just unreal, like standing inside someone else's memory. At my collarbone, the translator unit hummed quietly, converting alien speech into something simple. Obedient, reliable. Wrong. Because the truth was, I didn't need it anymore. The problem I didn't report. It started months ago. Patterns, repetition, sounds repeating in predictable ways. Then those sounds started feeling familiar. Then I understood words before the translator spoke them. Then sentences. At that point, I considered reporting it. Then I imagined the paperwork. So I stayed quiet. That seemed like the safer option. At the time, the conversation I was never meant to hear. They arrived like they always did. The Queen first. She looked almost human, but not quite. Her presence felt inevitable, like gravity deciding it didn't need permission anymore. Behind her walked the princess. If the Queen was certainty, the princess was a question. Curious, observing, still deciding what the world meant. They passed me without acknowledgement. As expected, I was background. They entered the chamber. The door sealed. I should have stayed where I was. I didn't. I shifted closer, just enough. The walls carried their voices, soft, distorted. The translator buzzed. I ignored it. Because beneath the distortion, I could hear them clearly. Not just words. Layers. Meaning beneath meaning. The Queen spoke first. You will proceed with the selection. But beneath that was something stronger. A directive. Unavoidable. The princess answered carefully. The criteria remains uncertain. Then the Queen said it. You will marry a human. The moment everything changed. My brain stopped. Then restarted all at once. Marry a human. That was fine. Diplomatic. Normal. Probably. Just not while I was standing 10 meters away realizing. I was one of the few humans on this station. I rejected that thought immediately. It came back anyway. Inside the chamber, the princess asked quietly, "And if the human does not understand?" The Queen's answer came without hesitation. "He will." That felt specific. Too specific. The doors opened. I snapped back into position. Perfect soldier. Neutral expression. A man who had heard absolutely nothing. The Queen passed. Then the princess. For just a moment. She looked at me. And something in her eyes shifted. Recognition. I didn't move. Didn't react. But one thought settled in my mind like gravity. I wasn't invisible anymore. And whatever plan had already been set in motion. I was in it. The next cycle felt longer. The station hadn't changed. Same rotation, same corridor, same pale curved walls. But something underneath it all had shifted. Like discovering a hidden meaning in a sentence you thought you understood. You can't unread it. And now everything feels intentional. I stood in position. Same as always. Still neutral professional. Pretending the previous cycle hadn't happened. That plan lasted about 12 seconds. The translator hummed softly against my collarbone, confidently misinterpreting conversations around me. 2 attendants passed by. Scheduling adjustments, the translator said. What they actually meant was closer to influence positioning, status negotiation, timing of leverage. I stared straight ahead. If this was casual conversation, I was starting to understand why humans were treated like enthusiastic but confused pets. Then I felt it. Not heard. Felt. A presence shifting the air before it arrived. Lighter than the queen. Less fixed. The princess. She stopped in front of me. That was new. Very new. Human soldier, she said. The translator buzzed happily. You stand here often. I nodded once. Yes, that is my assignment. Safe answer. Boring answer. Correct answer. She tilted her head slightly, studying me. You observe much. The translator simplified. You watch carefully. Close enough. I try to remain attentive, I replied. Still safe. Still controlled. Then she stepped closer. That was not safe. You understand more than you are told, she said. The translator hesitated. Then failed completely. You seem perceptive. I almost laughed. Internally. Outwardly, I stayed perfectly still. I only understand what I am trained to understand, I said. Yes. Careful. Measured. A lie wrapped in truth. She watched me. Then she smiled. Not wide. Not obvious. But enough to change something in the air. Your training must be exceptional. The translator. You are well trained. I was starting to resent it. Silence stretched between us. Not empty. Active. Like something being tested. I have a question, she said. I nodded. Do humans always pretend not to understand when they are uncertain? A pause. Then. Or is that something you have developed uniquely? The translator gave up halfway through. Uncertain meaning unclear. Useless. I chose honesty. Partial honesty. Sometimes, I said, it is safer to understand less. She held my gaze. Then, she laughed. Soft, controlled. Genuine. Then you must feel very safe, she said. The translator. You are safe. Not even close. She stepped back. Distance restored. Control reestablished. For now, she added. That part translated perfectly. She turned to leave. Then paused. Looked back. There are many meanings, she said quietly. You should be careful which ones you choose to hear. The translator once again. Be careful. And just like that, she was gone. The realization I couldn't ignore. I stood there. Same position. Same role. Same corridor. Except now, I knew something I couldn't ignore anymore. I wasn't just listening. I was being listened to. And worse, she knew. Or at least she suspected. I exhaled slowly. Adjusted my stance. Looked straight ahead. Just a human soldier. Understanding nothing. Except that I had just been tested. And I had no idea if I had passed. The chamber did not return to silence after their words. Instead, it listened. That was the only way I could describe it now. Not inactive, not idle, just aware in a way that no structure had any right to be. The patterns along the walls held steady, no longer shifting unpredictably, no longer testing or aligning. They had reached something like equilibrium, and for the first time since I entered, the space felt stable. Which, given everything that had happened, was deeply suspicious. I remained where I stood, though my posture had changed. Not the rigid stillness of a guard anymore, but something more grounded, intentional. Across from me, the princess hadn't moved far. The distance between us was still there, but it no longer felt like separation. It felt like space that could be crossed. Behind her, the court lingered, quieter now. Observers, not participants. And at the far end, the queen stood exactly as before, her presence unchanged, yet somehow less imposing. Not because she had diminished, because something else had risen to meet it. I took a breath. So, I said, because apparently I had accepted my role as the person who addressed impossible situations like casual inconveniences. We've reached the part where I ask what I'm actually supposed to do. The princess tilted her head slightly. You are already doing it, she replied. Of course I was. That would have been too easy otherwise. I'm standing, I said. I've been doing that for days. I feel like there's more to it. A faint smile touched her expression. There is, she said. Helpful. I exhaled slowly, glancing briefly at the patterns suspended between us. They hadn't disappeared. They weren't active either, just present, like a statement that no longer needed to prove itself. And the connection, I asked, that's going to what stay? The chamber reacted subtly to the word. Stay. The princess followed my gaze for a moment before answering. It will remain, she said, but it will change. That sounds ominous. It is not meant to be. Comforting. A pause settled between us again, but it wasn't heavy, not like before. It felt more like a shared space than a gap. I shifted my weight slightly. And if I decide this was all a misunderstanding, I said carefully, and go back to standing in the corridor pretending I don't understand anything. The question lingered. Not just between us. In the room. I felt it. The chamber didn't react immediately, but something in the air tightened just enough to suggest that the answer mattered. The princess stepped a little closer. You could, she said. That wasn't the answer I expected. I blinked. That's it, I asked. No cosmic consequences, no system collapse, no offended alien architecture. Her expression softened. This is not a binding imposed on you, she said. It is a connection recognized. That was different. I let that settle. So I can walk away. Yes. And everything just goes back to normal. A very slight pause. No. I nodded. Yeah, I said, that sounds more accurate. Because even if I walked out, even if I pretended none of this had happened, I'd still understand. I'd still feel that quiet presence in my chest. I'd still know that somewhere in the station, something had recognized me. You don't unlearn that. You don't unknow it. I looked at her again. And you, I asked, what happens if I walk away? Her gaze held mine. For a moment I thought she might give me another layered answer, something precise, controlled. Instead, she said simply, I would continue. No hesitation. No drama. Just truth. And somehow that made it heavier. I exhaled. Right, I muttered, of course you would. Behind her, one of the court members shifted slightly, as if recalibrating their expectations again. I was getting used to that. I glanced briefly toward the queen. She hadn't moved, but I could feel her attention. Not pressure, not control, just awareness. Like she was waiting to see what I would choose. That realization settled deeper than anything else so far. Because for the first time since this began, This wasn't about translation, or misunderstanding, or accidental involvement. This was a choice. Mine. I looked back at the princess. The connection between us wasn't visible now, not in any obvious way, but I could feel it. Quiet, steady, no longer demanding anything. Just there. Waiting. You said earlier, I began slowly, that this started as a directive. She nodded. And now it's an option. Yes. I took another breath. Then I guess I should treat it like one. That would be wise. I almost smiled. Good, I said. I've always made my best decisions under minimal pressure in highly advanced alien environments. That earned another small laugh. I was starting to like that. Probably a bad sign. I stepped forward. Not much. Just enough to close a small part of the distance between us. The chamber responded, not dramatically, not with pulses or light. Just a subtle shift, like something acknowledging movement in the right direction. I stopped there. This connection, I said, quieter now, more deliberate, what does it actually mean? She didn't answer immediately. Not because she didn't know. Because she was choosing how to say it. Finally she spoke. It means, she said, that we are no longer separate in the way we were. That sentence landed. Simple, heavy, unavoidable. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said, that's significant. Yes. And it leads to. She met my gaze. That depends on what we choose to build from it. Not fate. Not obligation. Choice. Again. I exhaled longer this time. Because somewhere between confusion, survival, and accidental understanding, I had ended up here. Not as a guard. Not as a variable. But as something else entirely. Something the station had recognized. Something the queen had expected. Something the princess had chosen to accept. And now, I had to decide if I would do the same. I looked at her. Really looked. No translator. No layers. No distance. Just understanding. Then I nodded. All right, I said quietly. And this time, there was no hesitation in it. Let's find out what this becomes. The chamber didn't react with light or sound. It didn't need to. Because for the first time, it wasn't waiting anymore. The chamber didn't celebrate the decision. There was no surge of light, no dramatic shift in the air, no grand acknowledgement from the structure itself. Instead, everything settled. Not into silence. Into agreement. The patterns along the walls maintained their steady rhythm, no longer searching, no longer adjusting. The resonance in my chest didn't intensify or fade. It simply stayed, like something that had found its place. I stood there for a moment, letting that realization sink in. No alarms. No warnings. No sudden consequences. Just the quiet understanding that whatever line I had just crossed, I wasn't going back. Is it supposed to feel like this? I asked. The princess didn't look surprised by the question. It is, she said. That's slightly concerning. A small smile. You expected something else. Honestly, I exhaled. Yes, something louder, possibly with consequences. There will be consequences, she said calmly. Of course there would be. I nodded. Good, I muttered. Wouldn't want this to be simple. That earned another soft laugh. Behind her, the court remained still, but the energy in the room had changed. Not tense, not uncertain. Resolved. They weren't watching to see if something would happen anymore. They were watching to see what would follow. That was somehow worse. I shifted slightly, glancing again at the space between us. The structure that had formed earlier was no longer visible in the same way, but I could still feel its presence, not as something external, as something shared. So, I said, because apparently I was determined to keep narrating my way through this, what changes first? The princess considered that. Perception, she answered. I frowned slightly. That's vague. It is accurate. That's not helping. Her expression softened just a fraction. You already feel it, she said. I paused. Because she wasn't wrong. The chamber felt different. Not physically. Familiar. Which made absolutely no sense. I glanced toward the walls again. The patterns that once felt alien now carried a faint sense of structure I couldn't follow. Lie explain. Not readable. But not incomprehensible either. That's new, I admitted. Yes. And that's because of this. I gestured lightly between us. Yes. I exhaled slowly. All right, I said, so I'm adjusting. You are aligning. Of course I am. She tilted her head slightly, watching me with that same precise awareness, but now there was something else layered into it. Not analysis. Understanding. You are not uncomfortable, she noted. That caught me off guard. I should be, I said. But you are not. I considered that. Because she was right again. I wasn't calm exactly. But I wasn't resisting anymore. The tension that had been sitting just beneath my thoughts since I arrived on the station. It wasn't gone. It just wasn't fighting me anymore. I think I passed the point where being uncomfortable was useful, I said. That is also accurate. A pause. Then I added, still not sure that's a good thing. Her lips curved slightly. It is a necessary thing. Behind her, the queen finally moved. Not much. Just a single step forward. But the chamber responded instantly. Not with force. With recognition. The subtle rhythm of the space shifted, aligning slightly toward her presence. I straightened instinctively, not out of fear but out of habit. Old instincts didn't disappear overnight. The queen's gaze settled on me. Direct. Unfiltered. You have chosen, she said. The translator was off. I didn't need it. Yes, I replied. No hesitation. No second guessing. Her expression didn't change, but something in the air did. Acknowledgement. Then you will remain, she said. I blinked. I was already planning to, I said carefully, but I appreciate the confirmation. A very faint shift among the court. Not quite amusement. But close. The queen continued. The convergence is not complete. Of course it was. That would have been too easy, I muttered. The princess glanced at me briefly, and I caught the hint of a smile again. What remains? I asked. The queen held my gaze. Integration. That word carried weight. More than the others. I felt it settle somewhere deeper than thought. And what does that involve? I asked. A continuation of what has begun. Still vague. It is not meant to be simple. Of course it is. Another pause. Then, because apparently I had committed fully to this path, I asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind since this started. And the marriage part? The chamber didn't react. But the court did. Subtle. Precise. Attention sharpened. The princess didn't look away. The queen didn't hesitate. It remains a possible outcome, she said. Possible. Not required. That mattered. I exhaled. Good, I said. I prefer my life-altering commitments to come with at least some level of discussion. The princess stepped slightly closer again. "That discussion is now available," she said. I looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time since this began, this part didn't feel like diplomacy, or obligation, or some cosmic system deciding things for us. It felt personal, which was somehow more complicated. "Right," I said quietly. The chamber held steady around us. No pressure, no urgency, just space. Space to decide, space to understand, space to continue. I took a slow breath, then nodded. "Okay," I said. "Then we take this one step at a time." The princess mirrored the small nod. "Yes." No layers, no hidden meanings, just agreement. And for the first time since stepping onto this station, that felt like the most stable thing in the room. The chamber didn't push us forward. That was the strangest part. After everything, the alignment, the resonance, the quiet shift from observation to participation, you would expect something to drive the next step. A command, a signal, a moment where the universe politely insisted we stop hesitating. But nothing came. The space remained open, patient, waiting. I stood there, aware of the subtle presence in my chest, aware of the princess just a few steps away, aware of the court and the queen and the fact that I was now, somehow, an active participant in something I still couldn't fully define. And yet, no one moved. No one forced the next moment into existence. I exhaled slowly. "So this is the part," I said, "where nothing happens until we decide it does." The princess gave a small nod. "Yes." I glanced around the chamber again. Still the same. Still watching. Still aware. "Good," I muttered. I was worried there might be more unexpected system activations. "That phase is complete," she said. "That's reassuring, I think." A pause. Then I added, "So what does integration actually look like? Because I'd like to avoid accidentally triggering another, whatever that was." Her expression softened slightly. "It begins with understanding," she said. I almost laughed. "That's been the problem from the start. It is now the solution." I tilted my head slightly. "That sounds like something someone says right before things get more calm." Placated. "They will," she said calmly. "Of course they would." I nodded once. "All right," I said, "then we start there." Another quiet moment passed. Not empty. Deliberate. Then she did something new. She stepped forward. And this time, she didn't stop at that careful, measured distance she had maintained before. She closed it. Not abruptly. Not cautiously. Just naturally. Until she stood directly in front of me. Close enough that the space between us no longer felt like space. The chamber reacted. Not with energy. With stillness. Everything aligned just slightly tighter, as if focusing. I didn't move. Not because I couldn't. Because I didn't feel the need to. Her gaze held mine. No analysis. No testing. Just presence. "This is where it changes," she said quietly. "No translation needed." I nodded. I figured. The resonance in my chest shifted. Not stronger. Clearer. Like something that had been waiting for this exact moment. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Nothing forced," she replied. "Only what you choose." Choice again. Always back to that. I exhaled. "Then I guess I'll start simple," I said. She didn't interrupt. Didn't guide. Just watched. I reached out. Slowly, deliberately. giving her every opportunity to step back if this wasn't right. She didn't. My hand paused for just a fraction of a second, then gently met hers. The moment contact happened, the chamber responded. Not with noise, not with light, with alignment. The patterns along the walls shifted in perfect synchronization, subtle but unmistakable. The resonance in my chest matched, not echoing, not reacting, matching. I inhaled sharply, not from pain, from clarity. It wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't consuming. It was precise, like two separate signals finally locking into the same frequency. Her fingers tightened slightly, not gripping, not holding. Acknowledging. I met her gaze again. No confusion. No distance. Just understanding. That's new, I said quietly. Yes, she replied. Behind us, the court shifted again. This time, there was no uncertainty in it. Only recognition. The queen remained still. But the space around her carried something different now. Not authority. Approval. I let out a slow breath. Okay, I said, so that's step one. The princess's expression softened just slightly. Yes. And step two. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced briefly at our joined hands. Then back at me. That depends, she said. On what? On whether you step forward again. I almost smiled. Of course it does. Because nothing here was ever going to be simple. I looked at her, then at the chamber, then back at her. Every instinct I had said this was the point where things either stabilized or changed completely. I tightened my grip just slightly. Not enough to hold, just enough to choose. All right, I said quietly. Let's not stop at step one. The chamber responded instantly. Not violently, not dramatically, but undeniably. The alignment deepened. The connection sharpened. And for the first time, it didn't feel like something happening to me. It felt like something happening with me. Her eyes held mine. And this time, there was no question left in them. Only certainty. The moment didn't escalate. It deepened. That was the difference. No surge of energy. No overwhelming force trying to redefine reality around us. Instead, everything narrowed, focused, like the chamber had decided that precision mattered more than spectacle. Her hand remained in mine. Not tight, not hesitant, present. And the connection, whatever it was, responded accordingly. It didn't expand outward. It settled inward. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself as that clarity sharpened again in my chest. Not unfamiliar anymore. Not something to question. Something to work with. That's a lot more control than I expected, I said. The princess watched me closely. It is no longer testing, she replied. Good, I said. I was starting to feel like a very confused experiment. A small flicker of amusement crossed her expression. You were, she said. I blinked. All right, I muttered. I appreciate the honesty, late but appreciated. That earned another quiet laugh. Behind her, the court had shifted again. Not forward, not closer, but more defined. Their presence no longer uncertain or analytical. They had reached their conclusion. Now they were simply witnessing what came next, which, judging by my current situation, was still very much unclear. I looked down briefly at our joined hands. Still steady, still aligned. Then back at her. So this is integration, I said. It is the beginning of it, she corrected. Of course it is, I sighed. There's always a beginning of a beginning. She didn't argue with that. Instead, she stepped just slightly closer. Close enough that the alignment between us wasn't just something I felt. It was something I understood. Not logically, instinctively. And that was new. Your perception has shifted, she said. Yeah, I replied, I noticed. You are no longer separating what you feel from what is occurring. I frowned slightly. That sounds like something I should be more concerned about. It is something you should be aware of, she corrected. Right awareness, that's better. I paused, then added slightly. Her gaze held mine. You are not losing yourself, she said. That mattered more than anything else she had said so far. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear it until she said it. I nodded once. Good, I said quietly. I'd like to keep that part. You will. No hesitation. No ambiguity. Just certainty. And strangely, I believed her. The chamber shifted again, subtly. Not reacting. Adjusting. As if accommodating something that had now stabilized. I took another slow breath. Okay, I said, so I'm still me. Yes. And this connection doesn't change that. It expands it. I exhaled through a quiet laugh. That sounds like a very careful way of saying everything is about to get more complicated. It is a precise way of saying it. Of course it is. Another brief pause. Then I asked the question that had been building quietly beneath everything else. And you, I said, does this change you? That mattered. More than the system. More than the chamber. More than whatever this connection actually was. She didn't answer immediately. For the first time since this began. She considered. Not strategically. Personally. Yes, she said finally. Simple. Honest. How, I asked. Her gaze softened slightly. I am no longer observing you as something separate, she said. That echoed. Uncomfortably clear. And that's good, I asked carefully. It is real. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said, I'll take real. Because at this point, real was the only thing that made any sense. Behind her, the queen stepped forward again. This time, the chamber didn't shift toward her. It acknowledged her. But it didn't recenter. That was new. That meant something had changed in the structure of attention itself. I straightened slightly, instinct kicking in again. The queen's gaze moved between us. Not evaluating. Confirming. The integration holds, she said. No translation needed. I glanced briefly at the princess, then back at the queen. Good, I said. That sounds like something we want. It is, she replied. Short. Certain. Then she added. It will continue. I exhaled. Of course it will. Because nothing here had an off switch. The queen studied me for a moment longer. You accept this, she said. Not a question. A statement. I met her gaze. I do, I said. And I meant it. Not because I understood everything. Not because I knew where this would lead. But because walking away didn't make sense anymore. And staying didn't feel like a mistake. That was enough. The queen inclined her head slightly. Not authority. Acknowledgement. Then she stepped back. And for the first time since this began, her presence no longer defined the room. It simply existed within it. I noticed that. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to. But I did. I looked back at the princess. Our hands still connected. The chamber still steady. The system no longer reacting. But continuing. So I said quietly, we're past the part where I pretend I don't understand what's happening. Yes. And into the part where I figure out what to do with it. Yes. I nodded. That feels manageable. It will be. I almost smiled. You say that like you're sure. I am. I took a breath. Then another. Then I made the only decision that felt consistent with everything that had led here. I didn't let go. Not because I had to. Because I didn't want to. And for the first time, that felt like the right reason. The chamber didn't react. It didn't need to. Because the moment didn't require confirmation anymore. It had already been accepted. Nothing rushed after that. No sudden shift. No escalation demanding immediate action. For the first time since this began, everything moved at a pace that felt chosen. I stood there with her, the connection steady, quiet, no longer something new or unstable. Just present. And that changed everything. Because uncertainty had been replaced by something far more dangerous. Clarity. I exhaled slowly. This is the part where I start getting used to it, isn't it? I said. The princess didn't look away. Yes. That might take a while. It already has. I paused, then nodded. Fair. Because she wasn't wrong. This hadn't started in the chamber. It started the moment I began understanding. The moment I chose not to report it. The moment I stayed. Every step since then had led here. Which meant this wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. That thought settled quietly, without resistance. I glanced briefly at the chamber around us. Still aligned. Still steady. Still aware. But no longer watching for change. Now it was simply holding it. So what now? I asked again, softer this time. Not because I expected a different answer, but because the question meant something different. No. W. The princess shifted slightly closer, not closing distance anymore, just existing within it. Now, she said, we continue beyond this place. That made sense. The chamber wasn't the end. It was the beginning point. Of course it was. Integration doesn't happen in one room, I said. No. Good, I nodded, because I'd prefer not to spend the rest of my life here. Another small smile. You will not. Reassuring. Behind her, the court had begun to reposition. Not leaving, but transitioning. Their formation loosening slightly, no longer centered entirely on us. The convergence phase, whatever that fully meant, was ending. Or evolving. Same thing, probably. I looked toward the queen again. She hadn't stepped forward this time. She didn't need to. Her role here was complete. That much was clear. And that realization came with something unexpected. Not pressure. Not fear. Respect. Not the kind you give to authority. The kind you give to someone who saw the outcome long before you did. I turned back to the princess. So we leave, I said. Yes. And then we determine what this becomes. Still that. Still choice. Still open. I exhaled. I'm starting to see a pattern. You are meant to. Of course I am. I glanced down briefly at our hands. Still connected. Still steady. Then back at her. Does this connection stay like this? I asked. No. That got my attention. It evolves, she continued. That's either reassuring or concerning, I said. It depends on how you define change. I'm starting to realize that's a very dangerous question here. It is an important one. I nodded slowly. All right, I said, then I guess I'll learn as it happens. That is the only way. No instructions. No manual. Just experience. That seemed to be the theme. The chamber shifted slightly, not dramatically, just enough to signal transition. The patterns along the walls softened, their structure loosening into something less focused. The space was releasing us. I felt it immediately. That quiet sense of expectation fading. Not gone. Just no longer centered here. I looked around one last time. At the architecture. At the patterns. At the place where everything had changed. Then back at her. Ready? I asked. She didn't hesitate. Yes. Simple. Certain. Together, we turned toward the threshold. This time, there was no hesitation when I moved. No resistance. No uncertainty. Just motion. The moment we stepped forward, the chamber responded. Not by pulling us back. By letting go. The resonance in my chest remained steady as we crossed the threshold. Unchanged. Unaffected. Which told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't tied to the room. It wasn't temporary. It wasn't conditional. It was real. We stepped back into the corridor. The same curved walls. The same quiet hum. The same distant movement of the station. And yet, none of it felt the same. I stopped briefly, adjusted my stance out of habit, then realized I didn't need to. Not in the same way. I wasn't just standing guard anymore. I glanced at her. She noticed. Of course she did. You are aware of the difference, she said. Yes, I replied. You are no longer observing from outside. No, I said. I'm not. That settled quietly between us. Not heavy. Not uncertain. Just true. Further down the corridor, a few attendants moved as usual. But now, I understood the layers in their voices without effort. Not something hidden. Something natural. Like I had finally stopped listening from the wrong perspective. I exhaled. Well, I said, this is going to take some getting used to. Yes. You say that like it won't be a problem. It will not be. I almost smiled. You're very confident about that. I am. I looked ahead, then back at her, then forward again. And something clicked into place. Not dramatically. Just clearly. I had spent all this time trying to avoid understanding. Trying to stay safe. Trying to remain separate. And now, I was. And somehow, that didn't feel like a loss. It felt like the first time I was actually part of something. I straightened slightly. Not out of duty. Out of decision. All right, I said quietly. Let's see what comes next. She met my gaze. No distance. No uncertainty. Together, she said. And this time, there was no part of me that questioned it. The corridor didn't feel smaller when we stepped into it. It felt wider. Not physically, but in a way that mattered more. Before, it had been a place I stood in, a fixed point, a role, a boundary. Now, it was just part of where I was going. I walked beside her, not ahead, not behind. The distance between us no longer measured in space, but in something quieter. Something already bridged. The station continued its slow, deliberate rotation, the same steady rhythm that had once felt distant and mechanical. Now it felt intentional. Like everything here had always been moving towards something. and I had finally stopped resisting being part of it. We moved without urgency. There was no rush in. Immore. No countdown. No hidden moment waiting to force itself into existence. Just time. And choice. Ahead, the corridor opened into a wider passage where light from distant structures filtered in, soft and layered. Figures moved in the distance. Attendants, officials, lives continuing as they always had. And yet, not the same. Because I wasn't the same. I understood them now. Not just their words. Their meaning. Their intention. The layers that once felt like secrets now felt like language. Natural. Accessible. Mine. I exhaled slowly. Well, I said, glancing slightly toward her. I guess this is where things start getting complicated. She didn't look surprised. They already are, she said. Right, I nodded, good point. A small pause. Then I added, I mean the kind of complicated that continues. That is inevitable. Of course it is. We walked a little further in quiet. Not empty silence. Comfortable. The kind that doesn't need to be filled. After everything. That might have been the strangest part. I glanced at her again. You said earlier this was an option, I said. Yes. And now? She met my gaze. Now it is a choice being made. Present tense. Ongoing. That mattered. I nodded slowly. Good, I said. I prefer decisions I can keep making. You will need to. Figured. We reached a junction where the corridor split, pathways extending deeper into the station's layered design. I slowed slightly. Not because I didn't know where to go. Because for the first time, direction wasn't assigned. It wasn't dictated. It wasn't expected. It was open. I looked ahead, then at her. So I said, where does a human who accidentally becomes part of an alien convergence go from here? There was the faintest hint of amusement in her expression. You are no longer accidental, she said. Right, I nodded. I keep forgetting that part. She gestured, not commanding, not leading, simply indicating one of the paths. We begin there. I followed her gaze. The corridor ahead curved gently, disappearing into the station's inner structure. Unfamiliar. Unmapped. Exactly what I should have expected. I took a slow breath, then looked back at her one more time. Not as a variable. Not as a role. Not as something assigned to me. As a person. As someone who had stood in that chamber and chosen the same unknown I had. That seems reasonable, I said. She tilted her head slightly. It is only the beginning. Yeah, I replied quietly. I'm starting to understand that. A moment passed. Then I stepped forward. Not out of duty. Not because I was told to. Because I chose to. She moved with me. Not following. Not leading. Together. The station didn't react. It didn't need to. Because this time, nothing was being tested. Nothing was being confirmed. Nothing was waiting for alignment. It had already happened. The convergence wasn't a moment. It wasn't a chamber. It wasn't a single decision. It was this. Walking forward into something undefined. And choosing it anyway. Side by side. No translation. No distance. No uncertainty that mattered. Just possibility. I let out a quiet breath. Then, because some habits don't disappear completely, I said, so I'm still technically on duty, right? She looked at me. And for the last time, she laughed. Not layered. Not distant. Real. Yes, she said. I nodded once. Good, I replied. Wouldn't want to break protocol on my first day. And with that, we continued forward.